Okay, good. Then I suggest, yeah, why don't we, would you like to put out this screen with the, how to use the chat and all that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. 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 So, yeah, Kevin, then I think we can start. Can you put up the next slide, I think?
This one?
Yeah, or the first one, I don't know. Okay, maybe this one, yeah. Okay. Then I just start now, or you want to show the first slide of the title page?
I think you can just go ahead, and then I'll move as you're speaking.
Okay, okay, yes. Okay, okay, welcome and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to our seminar on enabling smart cities by leveraging standards. I can see many of you have already joined. We are expecting quite a large audience from across ASEAN countries and also beyond. And I would like to welcome you and mention that this event is organized and supported by Access Partnership, the RMIT, and in the Australian government that supports the ASEAN digital trade. So all these parties have joined forces for this event, and we have a great range of very experienced speakers to talk about a topic that is maybe for some people quite technical, but it has also a lot of practical relevance as we move forward with our smart city development. And maybe just to mention, you are quite aware of this, but next week is the UN COP26 starts in Glasgow, and the UN Secretary General just a few days ago mentioned that we are completely off track to reach the Paris agreements. That was quite shocking news to the world, I think, and I hope many of you have followed these developments. But he actually said that if we go on like this, we will not reach the 1.5 climate goals, the Paris Agreement. So right now we have already more than 16% more CO2 emissions. And so the numbers are going up and not down. And so, as you know, many cities will be there in Glasgow, all kind of city associations, and I'm sure many delegates from the ASEAN governments will also be in Glasgow, because national determined contributions are very important, but at the very practical level, what cities can actually do to reach climate adaptation is crucial to really speed up the climate change adaptation. And so in this context, I think standards and having better frameworks that help us to follow track on where we are and where we want to go is really very critical to move ahead quickly. And so I think in this context also our topic today is so very relevant. And let me just start to give you a quick introduction to our speakers. I think we have a slide with all the, yeah, there it is, yeah. So we have speakers from across the region, and from, so Professor Trung Nguyen, he will give us, he's professor in Vietnam and in RMIT, and so he will talk about this role of standards. He will give us a very good foundation on what standards mean for cities. And then Helen, she will share more about the global standards, the ISO TC 268 on sustainable cities and communities. Then Joris van Etten from the ADB, who will talk more practically also about what's happening in the region. And then we have also another practical contribution from Farabi, who's head of Smart City of Plan Malaysia of the Ministry of Housing and Local Government in Malaysia. So each speaker will also share a bit more about his or her background when they introduce themselves. But maybe without, let us just start with the first presentation. And before that, I also want to mention that we really hope that you have many questions, and please feel free to use the chat to put your questions. And then, of course, we also have hopefully more than half an hour in the end to really go into details and have a good discussion on what to do. Okay, Trung, please start your presentation and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Waltraut. Very good afternoon from Vietnam to everyone. I hope you can hear me well, and it's very good chance for me, an opportunity for me to be here to share a little bit of our understanding about smart cities, and this has been our research interest for years now. And in fact, we are about to organize a large workshop, international workshop on this particular topic. Can you share my slide on screen, please? Or I will share from my one.
You can share it. If you'd like me to, you can let me know. But are you happy to share, or you want me to do it? Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Yeah, please do it. Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. So I have 10 minutes as required by the organizer. So my job is to go through very key 4 things. Next slide, please. Yeah, so here are my agendas. For 10 minutes, I gonna talk about kind of an overview about important roles of standards. And then we also relate to smart cities, how standards, important, very much important in smart city development. And I elaborate a little bit more on the guidance of the smart city operating models and the framework from ISO 37106 and from the other one from ITU named Y4461, Framework of Open Data in Smart Cities. And a little bit about how policymakers can collaborate and learn from each other. So that's the main 4 things that I'm going to discuss. So next slide, please. The next one, I like to talk about the roles of the standards in general. Next one also, please. So in general, the role standards, if you do a quick literature review, you will see that's several roles of standards. But in brief, we have 5 major ones. So first of all, with the standards in place, we improve clarity, right? So any plan, any strategy, clarity is number 1. So with standard, we have it, ensure the quality because of standards, and we promote the productivity. So in general, productivity comes if we have standards, and especially in manufacturing, you can specify the characteristics and the function requirements. Right, and then you ask your suppliers, or you have specific requirement for your product and service. So standards is very important. And finally, you can reduce varieties and enable consistency of manufacturing process and service delivery. So in general, that's the role. If we do a quick literature review, and you see that. And here I have 12. Next slide, please. The for smart cities is particularly important because smart city development is really complex and difficult. I think our next speakers will also talk about the complexity of implementing. But for the role as a standard for smart city, we have at least 12 roles, and I go quickly because you may group them into 3 important things that people, process, and technology, right? So they have all the standards there. For example, if you have a benchmark, they will provide you a benchmark, right? So ensure the consistency between international and local. Even within the country, different cities in one nation can have different if you don't have a benchmark. So standards will have us in ASEAN. They set out basic requirements and for sustainable development in community. and especially when it's come to strategy and planning, it have a lot, with the standards. And very important, you will see that in any case, in any city, if you develop, the cost is huge. So standard will optimize the cost, right? And more importantly, they improve the data accessibility, right? And interoperation. Next slide, please. And like I say, the management side of it is also very, bit relief for those who manage, because it's very complex. So standards, especially the next two standardization from two organizations, will help many city planners and also leaders of those cities will follow their standards to make it easier. For example, they improve the ability of the cities to better manage and innovate for the future. So that quote from Patricia Makane. So that, because I have so little time, so I just want to, you can have a chance to see my slide later, but those are the important roles of standards for smart cities. So I'd like to set the sense. And now the next slide, I will talk about the ISO. Next slide, please. The ISO 37106. So this is particularly, ISO already, right? So no need for me to international to explain this international organization. And this particular 37106 is so important for us when it's come to sustainable community. And this one spits right to the SDG 11 as well. So really good one for us to know. Next slide, please. So what are the essential thing in this, if they also in this ISO, right? So this all from the ISO I just now mentioned. So they did mention that in the traditional model, we have the unconnected, right? And we have not customer focused, inefficient, closed, no ability to drive system innovation, no ability to drive city scales and that sort of thing. So it's basically the silo one, and it's not customer service. So that traditional level. Next one, please. But for the smart city that which we are heading for is they have different things. So city data will be unlocked from individual silos, right? And they have logical separation from data, service, and customer delivery layers, right? And especially the externally driven innovation, right? If you look at first part, like you see city information market players, you see a lot of people participate in that one. And finally, they have the ability to drive the citywide change at the speed, right? So if you look at this model, I think you can look at the three most important point that we mentioned here is citizen-centered service management and strategic management and digital physical resource management. This is different from the traditional level. So the next slide, please. The next slide is the high level of structure of this ISO. So in there are 4 components, and this is really important. Anyone who do about digital government or electronic government, you will know that it's really important for you to have the model in place, especially the guiding model. For example, you have the delivery principle, vision, citizen-centered, digital, open, and collaboration. Yeah. And second one is the key across city delivery process. So they all set in there for you. You look at in B, they have 14 items and discuss in here. Very good. And for the C, it means that the third component, benefit realization strategy. So they put in place, and very good for us to have a look. And I think in my country, they already translated in 2018 for this one. And finally, risk management. So these are very overall about the ISO 37106. I have received quite difficult question to answer, but I try to finish in the first ISO. And now I want to touch on the open data. So in a nutshell, ISO is really important. They stepped out for us, especially for smart city and sustainable as well. Next slide, please. So the second point, I try to raise the framework of open data in smart cities. And this is by ITU, right? Next one, please. So in this, I like to mention once again. I know that my our next speaker will talk more about this, but data now, like they say that for the engine, that's the new oil. For people, that the blood, that the DNA, right? DNA, right? So it's so important when we talk about data, not only here, but also for private sector as well. For smart city, it's also important. You may ask me, but I normally ask people, what's the opposite of smart city? My student would say that is stupid city, right? But it's not stupid. It's the siloed city. So the smart city, they are connected, and the main thing for that is data. So for that, I want to emphasize definition is there. You can see by ISO and also ITU. Next slide, please. And the benefits is there. I already say in the blood in it just is improve is so important, and you can see that improve the protect environment, they improve, they innovate, they help the economy, and they do many other things, right? So that's the benefit. Next slide, please. And there's 5 cases in open data in smart cities, and it's all there. And ITU, they make it very clear, and they focus in this guide is 3-1: repairing, publishing, and acquiring. So it's all there, right? It's hard for me to explain all of that, right? Next one, please. And next slide, please. But you remember that the key role, there are 3 key roles in that we just discussed: provider, publisher, and consumer. And each of them they specify very clearly. And next one. I try to keep with the time, right? So this is the final slide on this before I go to some recommendations. So framework of open data in smart cities, they provided in ITU, they provided 4 layers, right? So the first one is you have the application layer, the second one portal, the third one is storage, integration, storage, and finally data layer. If you go back to the other one, and you see that they have 5 phases, and then it go right into there. All right, finally, on next slide, please. Just a very quick one on how policy can collaborate and learn from each other. This is difficult, right? So we know that in ASEAN country, we have the World Smart City Forum. ASEAN, we have ASEAN Smart City Network, and they all try to, achieve from it. But from my end, I would like to, next slide, please. I want to touch on how we can do that. So we can do by adapting one of the mechanism that I found it important, especially for those who do public policy, in the effective institution platform. 70 countries there, they have a platform, and the approach that they use is P2P learning approach. I will explore more if we have more time to talk about how we can deal with that. And final slide, please. The final slide we talk on, if we follow the sharing approach and B2B learning, like our city rather will have to, we can share the approaches. We have the mutual learning, right? The mutual learning is important because countries are different, culture, people, operation systems in terms of public management, and Vietnam is especially different from other because we have one party system. There's good and bad there, so different from others. So we learn from diversity and flexibility, and finally we increase the option for support, right? So for 10 minutes I can't, and even 1 minute over already, so I apologize for that, but I have to try to cover 4 areas that the organizer want me to do, right? So finally, okay. This is the event if you want to join us later on, and a lot of World Bank, UNDP, and many international community join the whole day at RMIT in November, late November. Thank you very much, and sorry for 1 minute or 2 minutes over. Thanks.
No, Trung, no problem. Thank you very much. It was a very good overview on what's happening, and probably all of us, we also realize that it is a very complex public issue. So, and we will come back to many of the points you mentioned, like the peer-to-peer learning and the data frameworks and so on. But just to give the audience maybe a quick sense on where cities in ASEAN are. I mean, you are very much involved in this smart city planning and so on. So how many cities, what is the awareness on smart city in ASEAN in general? I mean, can you give us like a ballpark picture on how many cities actually have concrete strategies for smart city?
Yeah, it's evolving, right? So it's hard to say that you already there and then you will stay there, right? Maybe with what makes you there will not keep you there. That evolving technology change at the speed that you never know, and by definition, we don't have agreed definition for smart city, right? But for your information, for your question, I would say that in city in Asia, we can learn from Singapore, Hong Kong, and Japan and South Korea, Seoul, right, in South Korea. So in the ranking that I have so far, these are though the city that rank very high in the ranking in the world, and private ranking as well.
Yes.
And yeah, our team, our other speaker will touch more on that a bit more, but though in
Yes.
my mind that topic.
Yeah, I think that question I would also maybe come back in the later discussion, because of course everybody looks to Singapore and Korea, but what are we going to do for the millions of kind of middle-sized cities, you know, not necessarily the capitals, but really cities that have maybe only 500,000 or less inhabitants. They also need to get on track and understand these basics. Yeah. Okay, but maybe that's a question for the discussion later. So you already mentioned a very important person in your presentation, and that is Patricia Cartney, who was driving this global ISO standard on smart city for many years, and I think is still doing. And she was really a very strong person to promote this idea on establishing these standards. And so that's why we are delighted to have Helen, who was actually working very closely with her, with Patricia, for many years. Yeah. And so she will share with us the journey to reach these global standards and what they actually mean, what they have achieved so far. So maybe with this I can hand over to Helen. Helen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Are you using your slides yourself, or you also want Helen to? Yeah.
Yes, I'll be using my slides myself.
Okay, thank you. Yes, okay, great.
Thank you so much for this invitation, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess it's afternoon, evening in Asia. It's a little morning for us in Europe. So I'm going to share with you, as Waltraut had mentioned, an overview of the standards for data that we have created under TC 268, which is the technical committee under ISO for sustainable cities and communities. But I also wanted to share with you, since Patricia McCartney couldn't be here herself, she had asked that maybe I could share with you some of the practical implementations of the standards that have been done through the WCCD, the World Council on City Data. So my presentation will be based on that as well. I'm just going to share my presentation right now so everyone can see. And I'm also going to turn off my video. So okay, I think my video is turned off. Yeah, okay. Can everyone see my presentation okay?
Yes, if you put it on. Yeah, very nice. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm the executive advisor for the World Council on City Data. So for many years, I was also the executive vice president for the World Council on City Data. And I'm also the working group 2 secretary for TC 268 that was responsible for developing the standards on city data. So just a quick background of how we got started. So what I really wanted to present is the importance of data in smart cities. As we all know, data is the basis and foundation for smart cities, but it took a while for us to get here. So this all started back in 2008 when we started working with city data. And we have started to look at some of the challenges when we've been working with cities across the globe of what kind of indicators cities were gathering. Back then, this was just this was still a World Bank project, that we were working on, and we had 9 pilot cities. And the 9 pilot cities all came together and they were discussing indicators and what indicators they were measuring. It turned out that they were measuring around 1,100 indicators, but only 2 were comparable, because all the indicators were had slightly different definitions and slightly different methodologies. And also they were measured according to different boundaries. So these were kind of the major challenges that we saw while working with cities. And it was actually the cities themselves that decided, it was really important to standardize data, and that these ISO standards were needed in order for cities to have a framework on the standardized definitions and methodologies of indicators to report on. So based on that, we started in 2012 with the ISO TC268 committee to develop these standards, and the WCCD since then has been implementing the standards. So within TC268, these standards are developed under Working Group 2 under city indicators. And as Professor Trung had mentioned earlier, there's also Working Group 4 that is responsible for the ISO 37106. There are a lot of numbers in ISO, so I'm trying to remember them all. So within TC268, there are 41 participating countries. So all the participating countries contribute and vote on the standards development process. So they provide input and feedback in the drafting process for all standards. So the ISO 37120, what we call the ISO 37120 series of standards, is a little different from other more complex standards. Our standards are really indicators that have defined definitions and methodologies. So these standards have been developed by cities for cities. So the ISO 37120, which is indicators for city services and quality of life, what we call the indicators for sustainable cities, has been developed by cities. So we worked and pilot these indicators with 200 cities before it became an ISO standard. And since it's been an ISO standard, we have been implementing, the WCCD has been implementing the standard with over 100 cities across 35 countries. During the development of ISO 37120, cities came to us and asked us, well, smart cities is a really important topic, and there are not enough indicators in ISO 37120 that relate to smart cities. So they wanted us to develop a new standard for smart cities. And during the standards development process, it's a little complicated because every country is bringing their set of indicators. So there's often thousands of indicators that are being reviewed and suggested. So we have to, as a working group, we go through each of the indicators, discuss the importance of it, and discuss the relevance for all cities, because the international standards are developed for all cities and can be used by all cities. And then, so after ISO 37122 was published, cities also wanted indicators now for resilient cities. So we started developing ISO 37123, which is indicators for resilient cities. And now this has been published as well. And the WCCD is currently working with UNDRR and rolling out this standard for the Making Cities Resilient campaign. So across the 3 standards, the ISO 37120 series of standards, there are 19 themes that are consistent throughout the standards. And throughout the 3 standards, there are 252 indicators. So this is the ISO standard. This is the ISO 37120 series of standards. So ISO 37120 is the basis and foundation standard. So cities must implement ISO 37120 if they're interested in implementing ISO 37122 or ISO 37123. So just wanted to give some examples of how you can cluster the various standards and cluster them based on the different themes. So for example, you can use ISO 37120 and ISO 37122 for economic development and planning for robust futures. And here are some examples of some of the indicators. We can look at the city's unemployment rate, assess value of commercial and industrial properties, percentage of persons in full-time employment, youth unemployment, number of businesses, etc. And then you can also, this is from ISO 37122. So 37120 provides the background and the basis, and then 37122 goes into more detail under the themes that are specific to smart cities. So for example, number of STEM degrees, the amount of revenues collected from the sharing economy, the number of users of the sharing economy, and the number of vehicles registered in the city that are autonomous vehicles. So those are just a few examples of the indicators in ISO 37120. And now, as we know with COVID-19, the topic of health and resilience planning is really important. So you can use these two standards to look at health and resilience as well. So for example, we can look at renewable energy in 120. You can look at all the air quality indicators, life expectancy. Again, 37120 provides basis, and then 37122 provides more specific smart city indicators. For example, the number of electric vehicle charging stations, the city's population of unified online unified health profile accessible to healthcare workers, and the number of medical appointments conducted remotely. So these are all indicators that are going to be relevant and important as cities implement smart city initiatives. So as what the WCCD is doing with implementing and certifying this ISO family of standards is that it's providing globally standardized data. It provides also regularly reported annual reporting, and it provides independent third-party verified data. And also provides a one-stop shop for governments across multiple mandates. So this, I'm just going to run through quickly how governments are using the data. So governments are really interested in investable cities. So the indicators can be analyzed and grouped together for city leaders to look at the investability of their cities. They can also look at how the indicators are providing a background for city infrastructure, and then this benchmark can be used for data-driven investments and decision-making in terms of city infrastructure. It also provides year-over-year monitoring, as the first speaker also mentioned. Benchmarking is an important key of standards. So since cities are being certified annually, in consecutive years, they can use year-over-year monitoring. So for example, the WCCD has many foundation cities that have started since the beginning in 2017. So now that they have data certified, independently verified data for 5 years, they can track this information and see their progress. So for example, the city of Boston, you can see for kind of the investability of the city, the number of businesses per 100,000 population. You can see the trend that it's going through 5 years with 5 years of data. And also cities, of course, are using this for comparative benchmarking as well. And one of the main activities they're doing is localizing the data for the Sustainable Development Goals. So the indicators can be used to map progress at the city level to the Sustainable Development Goals. In the introduction, Waltraut had mentioned that cities play an important role in the SDGs. So the data can help cities and the national governments play a role. The data can help the cities play an important role in achieving the SDGs, and the national governments can help as well. So all of the 252 city indicators have been mapped to all 17 SDG goals. So within the standards themselves in the index, there is a mapping of all the indicators to the 17 SDG goals and targets. The WCCD also produces an annual report on the cities and their progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals as well. So for example, this is just one example of the ones that they have done for Dubai. So Dubai, for example, they this report shows Dubai's progress in terms of the sustainable development goals, but also it maps the indicators to the strategic plan as well. So finally, this data is globally standardized, regularly reported, and independently verified. And so the importance of this data is that it helps to create data-driven municipalities and incentivize performance. It helps to direct and monitor strategic planning. So many of the cities are using it for strategic planning, incorporating the indicators in their master plans. It also helps to inform and direct national and state level infrastructure spending in cities. So a lot of governments are looking at the indicators and how they can be used for showing progress in terms of infrastructure spending. And it all can also help drive job creation and economic development to attract investment with globally comparative data. In Toronto, there was an exercise with the Invest Toronto region, where they had mapped the indicators to show the global competitiveness of the region to attract economic development. And it could also be used to track progress on climate agenda and inform resilient city development and recovery. And also embrace the United Nations SDGs at the local level. So this is about localizing the SDGs. And I think that's my last slide. And yeah, thank you.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, Helen. That was for sharing these insights. I don't know for many of you if this was new. I mean, the standards have been around for a couple of years, but I hope in the discussion we can go back to this question. I mean, you mentioned these 252 indicators. So for me, this immediately raises a question like, how do you need to create a new department in your city, in your municipality office to someone who's really specialized this? Because we have national standards organization, but which cities are cities really having competent statistics offices to really keep track on all those indicators? So that's really also capacity and competency question. What would you say on that, if I may?
Yeah, so I think this was also, I think, the question you had posed earlier to the previous speaker about the small cities and medium-sized cities. What these standards actually do is, because they provide a basic framework of indicators, it can be used by smaller or medium-sized cities that don't have the capacity or resources to develop their own set of indicators in their departments. Yes. So often, it's a ready-made set of indicators that cities can use for, adapting to their own needs. And it's really what happens in city departments, and why we created this standard is that we know that data is siloed, and data comes from various departments, and there is no sharing of data. That was the biggest problem that we had faced working with cities. And I've actually worked in the city of Vaughan, which is a medium-sized city in Canada, to help with their smart city planning. And what we had done with that, and they are also a foundation city of the WCCD, so they have been, implementing, they've been involved in developing the standard. So they've been part of our work since, I guess, 2008. So they're quite familiar with the standards process. And what we had done is survey each of the departments to see who is gathering what data. And we also looked at Statistics Canada to see where the data is. And look at universities and look at different NGOs and different organizations. So it's a matter of sourcing the data. So it's not really creating new departments for a standard.
No, it's sourcing the data.
Yeah, exactly. And this is usually done in some cities have, and this may be in their smart cities unit. Some cities have their strategic planning initiatives units, and some cities have performance measurement units. So this is where these people can be responsible for these standards.
Okay. Yes, I think I see already a lot of questions and remarks in the chat. So please bear with us. We will get back to them in the discussion later. But particular on this question on the standards and how, what are they measuring? You mentioned also these 19 themes. I'm sure we will get back to them also in terms of urgency regarding climate change later on in the discussion. But thank you very much, Helen. You can, by the way, you can switch on your video if you want to see the speakers, but it's up to you. But then maybe let's go get some deeper insights on what's happening in Asian cities. And I'm very happy to see here that we have Joris van Etten, who is a senior urban development specialist at ADB. Are you here? Yes, okay, you're there. Okay, good, yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure you are quite aware of all these standards, topics, and so on. So, but you are also, as I understand, working quite closely with cities in the region. So, we are very much looking forward to hear from you, to share your experiences. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction, Frau Waltraut. So I'm indeed Joris van Etten. I work with the Asian Development Bank. I've been in Asia now for 20 years, working in Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and that's where I live. But I had the pleasure of visiting almost all countries in Asia and working there. And I'm particularly fascinated and interested on the topic of cities and been tasked within ADB to coordinate, among others, our smart cities work. However, one thing which I want to get out of the way is that I'm learning a lot today as well already about standards. It's actually a topic which I'm not that familiar with, particularly since I'm working mainly with these kind of medium-sized and smaller cities where data is not as readily available against, you know, some of the kind of gold standards of ISO as was presented here. So that will be a very interesting topic to discuss as to how you bridge that gap in understanding and capacity. Thanks, Kevin, for clicking on my slides. So we could go to the next slide. Because the key point I want to make is that indeed, of course, smart cities. Nobody wants to, as Trung said, nobody wants to be known as a stupid city or as a city which is not is still in silos, etc. But indeed, again, for many cities in Southeast Asia, particularly in the Pacific, smartness is not so much just about the digital element and the fancy smancy solutions which many of our private sector partners have to offer. But smartness is sometimes just to get the basics right, yeah. So basics such as, you know, basic sanitation and water supply, and how can you use data to enhance that access to smartness, access to those basic services. So the smartest things sometimes to do is to keep it very simple. That's what I want to say. Next slide, Kevin. Also, my second point I want to make here is that indeed it's for us, it's very much smartness. We much more interpret that in terms of livability rather than technology in itself. So you could have a very smart city which is not livable, but you could also have a very livable which is not very digitally advanced. Now, which city would you like to live in? I would say a city where you have human connections. That's a smart city for me. So I think, you know, we can talk long and short about the definition of smartness, but for me and for the work we do, livability is the key word there, actually. Next slide, please. So yeah, so this is what I was trying to underline is this topic of livability as a key driving force. So we do have this particular framework, which is part of our smart city analytical framework, which ADB prepared. But smart solutions are more cross-cutting and interconnected intervention areas, which, when holistically acted upon and sufficiently supported by key enabling factors, they support cities to achieve green, inclusive, competitive, and resilient outcomes towards the ultimate goal of, as I said earlier, equitable livability for all citizens. Next slide, please. So the work I currently, among others, coordinate is the ASEAN-Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund, which is a $20 million trust fund from the Australian government, which helps us to prepare and pilot projects on city planning, service delivery, and financial management. And there's a number of cross-cutting issues as well, looking at gender and social inclusion, climate change, and private sector involvement. And the key is to find and identify scalable and replicable best practices in ASEAN. Just a little side note on this best practices business. Actually, what I think is at the moment, we do not need just best practices, because best practices are based on history. We actually do need next practices. So what is really working for our cities? Next slide, please. The framework we use is the ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy Framework, which has also been supported by the Australian government to develop this. Next click, please, Kevin. And what you see is these 6 areas are closely aligned with existing sustainable urbanization frameworks, such as ADB Cities Book Database, as well as the ISO 37120, which was just presented. So I think there's a lot of entry points there. But next slide, please. What we mainly look at through this ASEAN-Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund is that we support cities at different levels. Bronze is cities where we engage in at a higher level for capacity development. Silver is where we really go a bit deeper into and provide very focused technical assistance. And gold is where we are providing investment grants for activities which people can really see, touch, and smell. So we have 26 cities. Some of those are part of the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. Some of them are not. But these are cities which ADB works closely with in order to experiment with smart city solutions. Next slide, please. So some examples of that are, for example, in Khai Son in Laos, where we support training through e-learning modules to enhance the linking of fresh graduate with future employers and to provide a platform for matchmaking. This has been particularly relevant, of course, as part of COVID-19 responses, but it responds also to the mismatch between traditional education and what many of the industrial estates in Laos require in terms of skills and attitudes of fresh graduates. Here in Indonesia, I'm based in Indonesia, we are working, among others, with the city of Makassar to develop a strategic urban framework for the Makassar city. And there we really look very much on bringing various layers of data together. And then lastly, Baguio in the Philippines, where we look at smart flood warning and information systems, particularly with also looking at accessibility for gender and other disenfranchised group, how they are able to get access to those data and information. Next slide, please. So for us, with these 26 cities, we've been looking at how to develop a baseline and compare. And that is, of course, also something which we could have used ISO for. But for us, really, the idea is we wanted to get a very quick snapshot of the level of smartness of a city. And we do that on simplified intervention logic, where we which can then create conditions for further interventions. We focus particularly on smart city governments, which links between these other topics, such as I already mentioned, such as gender, climate change, and private sector. And this allows then for tracking of changes and progress over time. So this baseline, which we've developed, and that approach is helpful for us to see where we are, and then at the end of the trust fund, what has been achieved. Thanks. Next slide. So this looks a bit complex, but for me, the key point actually, and if you for my presentation want to remember one thing, it would be this, is that I think there's a huge uptake in IT infrastructure and how people have access to how end users have access to devices. That creates a massive amount of data. So data collection is really at the core, and it's what many of us have talked about. But I'm more interested in what happens, of course, with those data. And so this, besides data collection as your first entry point, which of course is very crucial, your second is really where you can assess whether a city is smart is on their ability to manage the data. And then thirdly, to what extent they're able to use those data and analyze those data and interpret those data. And then the highest level of smartness, in my opinion, is of course, to what extent these data are actually being used for better improved decision making. So these 4 stages of data collection, data management and storage, data analysis and data interpretation for better decision making is really what we are looking at. Next slide, please. And then, so we have some quantitative indicators which look at the current status of the IT infrastructure and data sharing, as well as some other ways in which other ways in which we can look at what actually is happening. And then we have some qualitative self-assessments where cities themselves look at data management, and that is particularly to fill a little bit the gap of the fact that sometimes data are not available. So these qualitative self-assessments are very helpful to identify entry points for improvement. Thank you very much. Next slide. And then lastly, that's my indeed last slide. So for this, we continue through the Trust Fund also with webinars, interactive workshops, facilitated dialogues and e-learning modules to help cities within those 26 cities, but also beyond, to provide support and learning opportunities, because that thing is for sure that there's a huge capacity gap which needs to be filled. So with that note, thank you very much for now, and I'm looking forward to the further discussion. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Joris. Very interesting. There was also a question from the chat about what you ask, like what is the evidence that the data is actually used for action and for concrete projects in the city. So I think that's also what you are interested in your baseline framework. But so for instance, you mentioned this bronze, silver and gold cities. So could you say whether these gold cities are actually, do they have better data collection?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, on these cities, that is the way how we have categorized them for our level of support we are providing through the Trust Fund. It's not so much an assessment yet of, ranking of smartness.
No, I understand, but I was just thinking, if you are kind of a gold city, whether you should this kind of criteria might be included in the future, the capacity to use data for evidence-based policy making.
Absolutely, that's the whole idea. That of course, being a wanting to see value for money coming out of our trust fund, of course, as well. We want to work with cities which are most responsive and which are indeed, are motivated on this topic. And I think there's a massive amount of cities who are very excited about this topic. And as such, there's a huge demand to learn more, but how to go, move forward and go beyond just data collection to really finding ways for us to store that safely in an environment where everybody has access to those data in the city government and beyond, and then to really use that to analyze what's happening. That's really quite a next step, which still many have a long road to go. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I saw that you have many cities in Vietnam, but also in Malaysia, you had a Penang as one of your partner cities, And so, looking at Malaysia now, I would like to move to our next presentation from Malaysia, from the government of Malaysia, actually. And is Mr. Faradi Yusof, are you online? Because, hello? Oh, yeah, okay, now the video is also working. Okay, because you mentioned earlier that you had some internet problems. Hopefully it is now better. Thank you very much for joining. Yes, and so Mr. Farabi Yusof, he's in Plan Asia, which is in the Ministry of Housing and Local Government in Malaysia. And so we are looking forward to hear from you what Malaysia is doing in terms of adoption of standards and better use of data for smart city development. Over to you.
Thank you, Walt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Today, my name is Farabi, and actually I'm from the Plan Malaysia. So Plan Malaysia is actually a Federal Department of Town and Country Planning. So we just been rebranded as a Plan Malaysia under the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. So looking at this today perspective, I think we just taking a baby step towards implementing the standard. So probably we are the youngest the country probably in the ASEAN just started in terms of establishing the sustainable communities, cities and communities perspective. So next, please. So before I start my 10-minute presentation, probably I would explain on the role what the Plan Malaysia has played in a smart city. So because we have a lot of players in smart city, so our role at the federal level is to assist. We have about 154 local government. So our expertise and services that we are offering is for the smart city planning. So we have assist a lot of local government in coming up their blueprint, a smart city blueprint or action plan. And the second one is we are working the blue color. Our national smart city platform is a big data project. We are establishing under the Malaysian Urban Observatory. So this is a part what is beyond smart city. So data, big data is the way forward, and we are trying to connect all the cities that we have to leverage on the data that being generated by the smart city element. And the third one is on the smart city accreditation. So this is about what we are talking today is about the establishing a standard. So we are working with the Department of Standard Malaysia to establish. And the last one is about awareness. Next, please. So just a perspective on the overall cities of Malaysia. So we have the National Urbanization Policy. We have 5 categories of city, from a global city, regional city, capital, main center, and also the local center. So what Waltraut have mentioned earlier, the Penang is the city is Georgetown, so it's located on the north of side of Malaysia. So it's a regional city. So this is the category that we have in Malaysia in terms of the background of the cities. Next, please. Okay, so this is basically the key urban challenges that we have in Malaysia. So I guess most of the cities in Asia have a very rapid urbanization. You can see how the population growth from the year, there is no year, so from 2005 to 2011, 2018. So we have a very rapid urbanization, and this rapid urbanization have created a lot of urban issues such as solid waste, water usage, river pollution, and we are going toward aging population as well. And I think Malaysia is one of the highest country that have the vehicle ownership in Southeast Asia. So this is one of the main issue that we have in Malaysia. So you can see this is the global, the national issue that we're facing in Malaysia. Next, please. So having said that, the government have taken the initiative to introduce a textbooks for Malaysia in terms of the smart city. So having said a lot of rapid urbanization, we need a new intervention in how we manage our city. So smart city have been recognized as one of the solution, one of the means to achieve sustainable development. So Malaysia Smart City Framework have been introduced in 2019 based on the 7 components of smart city, such as smart government, smart people, smart digital infrastructure, smart economy, smart mobility, smart living, and also smart environment. So there is a lot of policy strategies, initiative, and indicators that we are using to monitor this. Next, please. So under these policies, there is one policies that have given the emphasis on the standard. So we know that there is no standard for smart city have been, no current standard have been introduced with regards to smart city in general. we have actually a standard or technical code with regards to telecommunication or digital infrastructure, but there is no standard with regards to smart city and specifically for the smart city. So this framework have introduced the standards, and the standard have been mentioned, established Malaysian accreditation on smart city based on ISO 37122, which is a smart city indicator. So this is what Plan Malaysia and Standard Malaysia is working on. Next, please. So, okay, the process, I would like to share some of the process, and the process is, next please, is under the, but prior to that, I would like to share, in Malaysia, in urban planning or spatial planning, we have a 3 tiers planning stage. One is at the national level, we are federation in a way, and also we have a regional and state planning as well, and also the lowest tier, we have the local planning. So in this planning level, we have our own planning tool, different, which is differentiate from every level. So at the national level, we have a set of a national policy, a lot of national policy. But what are really with us in terms of the tools that we are using is a planning guidelines. So there is a lot of guidelines and a lot of standards is actually within the guideline. However, this guideline is yet to be turned into a standard, as a standards, a real standard. So this is the area that we are looking to turn a lot of our planning guideline to turn into the standards. So next, please. So in establishing the standard, Department of Standard Malaysia have introduced the Technical Committee on Sustainable Cities and Communities. So we have 8 steps in establishing a standard in Malaysia. So this process is based on the Standard Malaysian Act 1996, or we know as the Act 549. And now currently we just started for the smart cities and sustainable communities, and now we are at the level of public comment, the step number 5, I guess. So we have a few steps more to accomplish our standard formulation. Next, please. So Department of Standard Malaysia with Plan Malaysia have established the TCD29, which is also a mirror committee to ISO 268, which is what Helen have explained earlier. So this is the mirror committee that we have in Malaysia, and under this committee we have 2 standards that we are working. One is smart city indicators, or based on the 37122, and another one is smart city ICT infrastructure. Probably this is an indigenous standard that we are working, and is being led by the Malaysian Communication and Multimedia Commission. Next, please. So of course, I think Helen have explained well this the important why we introduced 37122. But basically, this is what I can say is all 154 local government in Malaysia is gearing up towards smart city. So we need to have indicators, a standard to define what is smart city, probably in terms of recognition, and another aspect that I'm looking at is actually to have a systematic approach of smart city. So that at the end of the day, Malaysia have one standard that we can follow to the implementation of the smart city. Next, please. Okay, so we know that smart city, we have 19 city indicators and 80 indicators. I think this one has been explained by Helen as well. So next, please. Probably we would share more on the standard. Okay, so this is the summary of 80 indicators that we are looking at from the 37122. So these are the standard that we are looking in terms of the implementation for the cities in Malaysia. Next, please. So in terms of localizing this 37122, we already accepted the 37122 as identical adoption. However, looking at the in the process of localizing, we know that some indicators are probably is too early to be measured in Malaysia. So we have spoken to Department of Standard Malaysia. Probably we are introducing the national annex to suit with the local standard, to suit with the local environment, and to suit with the local condition that we have in Malaysia. Next, please. So next steps and way forward. Probably the last few slides. Okay. Okay, so in Malaysia, we are looking as the first standard to be implemented under the Sustainable Cities and Communities. We know that ISO 37122 can be used for multiple objectives for us. If you can see, we can use in three perspectives. One as a strategic perspective. So for strategic perspective, we can allow our 154 local government to use this as the smart city planning and priorities. So at the ministry level, we can use this to evaluate what are the projects they want to implement in the next Malaysian 5 years Malaysian plan or in the next rolling plan. The second one is also we can use this as a monitoring aspect as well. So we are intent to come up with the smart city monitoring maturity assessment. So we can monitor from the 154 local government which city are already at the certain levels of smartness and which are cities are still behind in terms of implementation. And the last one we can use as the recognition of the smart city status. Okay, next please. So in terms of the way forward, we use this 37122 as the smart city. What kind of smart city that we want to establish for Malaysia? So we want a people-centric smart city. So we want to leverage on these 80 indicators to come out with a people-centric smart city. So we know that the user have been the center of the smart city. So we must make sure the city focusing on the smart city that based on the people-centric. Next, please. So having said that, we know that the characteristic of the cities in Malaysia as well, we have a few cities categories, and very unlucky, I also being part of the formulation in the 37111, which is small and medium cities standard as well. So I think this is very important to have classification in terms of how we treat the large city, medium, and also small city, because they definitely couldn't compare, need to be treated based on their capacity building, based on their financial strength, and also a lot of other perspective as well. Next, please. So what we are focusing is, as I mentioned before, what is beyond smart city. So the future of the government is through digitalization and big data. So smart city as just as entry point, but we are looking in terms of how we want to leverage the urban observatory. So urban observatory is another issue that we are looking at for now. So for this, I can see there is a lot of standard with regards to the data integration, open data policy that we should establish in Malaysia in the future. So I think besides smart city, data is another issue that we want to focus on. I think that's all from me for now. Sorry for exceeding the 10 minutes.
Yes, no, it's okay. Thank you very much, Farabi. That was giving us a very good overview on what's happening in Malaysia. And yeah, I was really struck by your indicator on transport, where you said you have 32 million people and 32 million cars. So probably that's not the indicator that is according to the smart city standards, which advocates public transport in a much higher scale. Yeah. So that maybe for that you have a very specific Malaysian solution. Okay, I think before we go on with the general discussion, there will be a poll where we would like to get the advice of the audience. Kevin, are you bringing up that poll now?
Yes, I've brought it up just now.
So this is for the audience a chance to share, to give your views on two questions. First one, which you will see on the screen in a few moments. And then
it didn't come up.
Sorry, it didn't come up?
Oh, I'm saying it can be found in the chat if it didn't pop up on your screen. And you can see the results in the chat as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is already the result, is it?
Yep, you can see the live results in the chat.
So yes, okay, we cannot bring it up to the big screen. Yeah. Okay, so the first question was, what do you think are the most important elements that constitute a smart and resilient city? And there were 4 answer options, and let me just go through quickly to the results. So 10% say that advanced infrastructure and technologies is important. 36% think that involvement of citizen and collaborations in decision making is key, and 34% say that data sharing, analytics, and evidence-based policy making is important. And the last one, sorry, it's here. Okay, and only 18% think that data governance standards and regulatory frameworks are important. So this is based on 27 responses. So now, what do our speakers say that only 18% think that data governance and standards and regulatory frameworks are important? Can I invite some of you to? You're smiling. You're not surprised.
Yeah, of course. This is kind of a bit funny to have that kind of response in this particular
seminar.
But look, it is. The question was what's most important, and I think
yes,
in the issues is that is not unimportant, but that I think somebody's
yes
in the chat. I have this general. I get rather nervous or annoyed if people just think about smartness as being digital. If people think just about standards, I think people think just about if you have a tunnel vision in that way. Yeah. So whatever we as development partners is, we just have to also apply that same approach of cross-cutting, thinking how different pieces of a puzzle come together, and that's really smartness. Yeah, thanks.
I just wanted to add that I mean they're all interrelated. So I personally voted for data sharing, analytics, and evidence-based policymaking. But of course, that leads to the involvement. You need the data sharing in order to involve citizens and in collaboration and decision making. And in order for data sharing and evidence-based policy, you need the data governance and standards and regulatory frameworks. So they're all kind of interrelated, and it's very hard to say what is the most important. They're all important.
Exactly. Yes, that's of course. This is all are important, but I think it was asked like here, what is like the most important? So probably for a planner, you need to keep all these aspects, all these dimensions in your strategy. Yeah. Okay, Kevin, I think we have another question, right? Is it already started?
We do. I'll launch it now.
You launch it now. Okay. Yes. And yes, and here one of the guests here says that it's all of these questions are important. Yeah. Okay. Now the second one is coming. Maybe with a little bit more of. We only had 27 responses, so that's of course not representative in any way, but just give a flavor of how the audience thinks about these questions. So this question is, what are the key challenges facing urban planners when formulating smart cities policies? And here you can pick more than one. So cross-institutional collaboration, city concerns, policies. Okay, now let's see. Is it already, Kevin is already closed now?
It's still open, but you can see the results in
still open. Okay.
Already.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let me. It's a bit difficult to see for me here. 26, 22. Okay. Yeah. So 24 responses so far, and here, yes, That's an interesting answer here. Of course, that cross-institutional coordination and collaboration among public and private sector. Okay, that was mentioned by many of our speakers today, I think. Then citizens' concerns on data security and personal data privacy, 26% find this very important. Ensure policies and socially inclusive policies, 22%. And then building digital competencies in the city with 17%. Yes, I mean, this is, again, as probably you would agree that this is, again, all topics are important. But maybe let's pick up one of these, the cross-institutional collaboration and also the collaboration among public and private sector. Would you like to comment on? Yeah, please, because you mentioned that also in your presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. So probably to respond to this question, I think the keyword is siloed. So we need to change behavior and break the silo. In smart city, we have too often the city leaders think of smart city initiative as individual strategies. For example, smart parking, smart security, smart traffic light. Each area is treated as a standalone project rather than part of a comprehensive whole. So the result is that the solution, while smart and capable, are being implemented as silos and therefore limited to a narrow focus. So the smart city vision cannot be realized by using technology in isolation with no thought given to how they might relate or to work with or another achieve a common goal. So success in a smart city is depend on maintaining the balance between the technology, the level of integration, the data collected, and how the data can be leveraged to deliver the right intelligence. So smart city must move away from the traditional operating model, which is involve silos and department only focusing on one area of operation. Instead, collaboration between teams and system is critical to the development of the fully scalable smart city, where data can be shared horizontally for the benefit of multiple teams. I always say the keyword is what is beyond smart city. So urban planners, as my profession as well, we need to think what is beyond smart city, and the data is the answer.
Okay, but the data, Trung, Professor Trung, are you still there? I can't see you.
Yep, I'm here.
I was wondering, because you spoke about the open data, and open data is very often referring to government or public-owned data. So to what extent do we also need data from the private sector to get all this information that we need for better monitoring of the standards? Maybe some of you have an example of how you integrate private data into your data collection in the city.
Yeah, I think easier said than done, right? So Fabri maybe in the government side he can elaborate more. But from my research and also participation with the private sector in our research and the public research, we show that first two things here, right? So I agree, and the first it's all challenges there, but I agree that cross into institutional and coordination among the public and private sector is the tough challenge, especially in the case like Vietnam. The public administration, if you go to any governance ranking, is not so high, right? So, and also when you share, you have to have the data to share, right? Especially here, you have to generate the data. You have to go from digitization and then digital transformation. Digitization have to be in place. And in that digitization process, you need to have different others. Let's say a lot of SME and large firm in Vietnam in IT sector, and actually we are one of the strong in terms of the software and things like that in the world. But how far and how much the government allow these firms to be providing these services is another key challenge, right? So it's go back to open data. It's very important, but it's not easy, especially if you look at others. So in a nutshell, smart city, they go with the level of smart city, go with the level of the democracy as well. So how much transparent, how much willingness, how much accountable, how much responsible of the city is. So and it's going hand in hand with open data providing as well. For Vietnam, it's quite low. I need to be honest.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Helen or Faruk, would you like to, or also yours, and if the other speakers, would you like to chip in on this question on getting more data?
Yeah, just a quick note on my side. So for a lot of the cities implementing the ISO 37120 standards, we noticed that some of the data does come from private providers, especially for utilities companies. And that data is so important for cities. And it's kind of, I still can't believe that cities don't have access to this data. So, and also one of the indicators we have in 37120, which is one of the new indicators, is the number, I pulled it up here. It's the percentage of service contracts providing city services which contain an open data policy. So we're looking at which city contracts have open data written in the contract. So it's in the procurement process. And I know that there are cities that have have incorporated that, but we do know that procurement in cities is a major issue and a major backlog in terms of smart cities. So I know the city of Valencia, for sure, in Spain, they have that policy that all contracts must have an open data. So any contracts that the city procures the providers must provide open data to the city. So the cities own this data.
Okay, so, yes. I think transparency of procurement is still a big issue in many cities and countries. Yeah. Okay, there's one question here about standards calibrating the degree of citizen participation. Would any one of you comment on that, whether this is included in your strategies and whether you are collecting any data on that? Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah. Farabi?
I think I can tell from my
Trung, yeah. Well, yes, please share.
Yeah, I can share from my experience of research in this area. Early on, we do electronic government, right? So 15 years ago, that's my PhD thesis as well. And one of the issue is this city do this, that city do. They look at other, it become a fashion somehow, right? But when the take-up rate is very low, and when we look at the return, it's very low there. So so it have to be, I agree with them. Maybe Helen or Fabri and even tourists can help me answer this. But right now, I think that's a waste of resource if we go at a fashion rather than because in many poor cities they try to get the budget because when you don't have transparency, when you don't have the good auditing in place, and then you just buy it's never say you build it and they will come. It's kind of very old fashioned. In the past, in public policy, they say if you build they will come. It not happen, especially differences. There are a lot of differences in different infrastructure and local context there. So I can't answer that question, but I see that a big issue, and I agree with the audience who asked that question. It needs to be in there. Maybe Helen, you can answer from ISO point of view, but that's really the key one, especially for the poor region or underdevelopment countries.
I will say that there is an indicator we have for measuring that, but I think more so we do need, I know that there are specifically tech companies now that are measuring that. There are different, I can't think of the name of the company, but I have met companies at the Smart Cities Expo in Barcelona where they are measuring kind of citizen participation. And they're even, with AI, they're measuring kind of the degree of citizen satisfaction with certain services. So I think that's really important, that data layered on top of, the indicators of the city service and the infrastructure service is important, because we know that, the citizen sentiments are really important, citizen participation. But I can say that there's an indicator measuring that, but I think beyond that, there needs to be technology to really show how are citizens getting involved and how are they participating. I know that in a lot of cities now that their strategic plans, their master plans, they have to have a certain level of citizens participating in the development of that. So I think that's one way of measuring it, but to the degree of calibrating it, it's very difficult, I think, in my opinion.
Yes. At the same time, of course, citizens are also very big data. I mean, they have a lot of data that is potentially useful for a city, like not only in transport, but also in energy consumption and things like that. So, Farabi, what are you doing in Malaysia on this citizen participation?
Of course, it is always a focus for us. I think it is in line with what Joris has mentioned, the people-centric smart city. So we want to implement also the smart city that based on the people, the user, not only for embracing the technology as well. So I think part of the data in terms of the public engagement and also the cultivate the data sharing, that is the reason we established a journey called a National Smart City Platform. So one is looking at the data from the data as try to integrate all the government, private sectors in terms of the data sharing. The third phase, the next phase is actually we try to establish an urban platform with main focus on the participation of the citizen. For example, this is a type of platform that are using open data strategies and platform, crowdsourcing, co-creation platform, and other form of citizen engagement and ideation. So I guess we just are having one smart, we call a blueprint for Johor, if you know Johor next to Singapore. So we have the public participation in terms of we try to get what are the public opinion survey to do for the Johor for the next 10 years. So we have fantastic analysis on that as well.
Yes. Okay. Very, very good. Yeah. So yeah, I think Helen, you mentioned procurement or before, and I think that's also where, for instance, some cities have these participatory budgeting, so that you know, citizens can actually decide on how public money is spent. So, do you want to build more trees or more car parks or more whatever? I mean, that's requires quite a lot of communication, of course, and take the citizen needs more into account as on at eye level. You know, that they're not only the users, but they are also actively participating in shaping the future of the city. Okay, there just taking up. There was one more question here. I wanted, yeah. So that was this question about do you have a smart city in terms of use of technology, or more a smart government, which involves involving citizens, but also all the other stakeholders, academia and public sector and so on. Okay, but let me, I think we're already quite close to the end. So I want to ask this question about from sustainable to resilient city, and how can we actually at the current smart city standards, are they actually helping us to address the challenges brought about by the climate urgency? So like next week, maybe at the COP26, there will be the message, we need to double our efforts in all sectors, from energy to transport to other mitigation and adaptation measures. So double the efforts to reach the Paris Agreement. What would that actually mean to all our nice plans and strategies and standards? How can we cope with that? Maybe we can hear some statements from our speakers as a closing statement, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe I go first on doubling the effort. So for us, that implies that we are committed to do $100 billion worth of investments in mitigation adaptation by 2030. Now
by 2030.
Taking consideration that we do about 30 billion a year of new loans and projects, it is quite substantial. But
yes,
I think it really is more about the attitude, of course, in our engagement with cities, with national governments, and seeing to what extent we can all think about, introducing concrete measures. But it is scary times, because indeed the messages which you quoted at the beginning, indeed, of that it's not going the right direction, and that I had really hoped, and that just coming back to smart cities, we've seen an enormous, as a result of COVID, we've seen an enormous uptake on digitalization. And I had hoped that as a result of that, Build Back Better or whatever you call it, and given the lull in activities for a long time, that we would be doing so much better. But it's like we've studied so hard for a test. We take the test and then we still only have a 5 out of 10.
And then we failed,
So it's really, current practices. So that's what I was earlier saying. Okay, best practices is no longer you need to go for next practices. You need to do something much more radically different. Yeah, thanks.
That's right. Much bolder plans. Yeah. Okay, maybe a final comment from the other speakers. Maybe Trung, you want to start, and then Helen and Farooq.
Thank you. I strongly agree with Juris on that comment. We should not have best practice, right? Because we always have better in the future. But back to the climate change and the warnings recently, we have, I think, China and of course China and the US have to play a more important role there. But at the other country, level, like in ASEAN, we also have to speed up the digital transformation. I think in ASEAN, in SOM, just a few days ago at ASEAN, they already talk about that. But how can we make it happen? Because now the priority for the people is now resilience, how to deal with COVID, rather than pay more attention on the other one. So I think the key thing is we need to handle the short run, but we have a view for the long run, especially for our next generation with the danger of climate change like this. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Helen?
Thank you. So I think with regards to standards, we know that there are a lot of standards out there. There are more and more standards being developed, but if the standards are not being used, then they're just kind of sitting there collecting dust, or I guess just not being downloaded electronically. So I think the issue is that it's not about the number of standards that are being created, it's the quality of standards, and it's also whether or not they are being used by governments, by NGOs, by citizens, by cities. And then on kind of carrying on track, I think, as I mentioned before, I think as an advocate for cities do play an important role. So I think the national governments need to acknowledge the importance of cities, and we need to, going back to data, the data needs to be localized in order for cities to track their progress and be involved as well. So it's kind of this connection between the subnational and to the national, and the importance of this data to help the national governments to get there by involving the cities and the subnational levels.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. Okay, maybe very quick word from Farabi. And
okay, in Malaysian experience combating regardless of climate change or COVID-19, I think data integration and data sharing related standard need to be introduced and leveraged on this. Development in technology and data gathering have opened new opportunities and accelerate the possibility to improve quality of life. Only through smart cities will able to leverage technology and data facilitated by international standard to cope with the momentous challenge we face today, ranging from the long-term impact of climate change to the COVID-19 pandemic. So how city system interact, how we interact with this system, and how we interact with each other are questions of key importance to climate change or COVID-19 response and recovery, but also importance to our ability to contend with the challenges of all kind. Thank you.
Wow, that was a very, very good closing remark. Yeah, so I think there are still some questions in the chat which we could not answer to, but what we will do is we will perhaps summarize these questions and write a short summary of this this workshop and how to go forward with the quick adoption of standards to better monitor the development. Yeah, and just I also want to mention that in Europe, just a couple of weeks ago, there is actually a new standard, which is City Resilience Development, CWA 17300. So I think that's also interesting. It's moving beyond smart city, but maybe moving to how to quickly do the climate adaptation, and building stronger resilience is probably also a question of our time. Yeah. Okay, so I would like to thank you all, to all our speakers here, and to our guests, to our audience. Unfortunately, we did not have this feature of live participation here in this workshop. Maybe we can do that another time, so that the audience can also be more visible and actively taking part in this conversation. I understand that this session has been recorded, and so you will also be able to see this online sometime later on. So thank you very much to all of you, and for enlightening us. And I give the word back to Kevin if he wants to do a closing remark from the organizer side.